This is Vikram Shah, and today I'm just going to share my perspective of what you should do while you're on the waitlist. So it's going to be a pretty short but detailed presentation on waitlist strategies and things that you should be doing during this time. And at any point, if you have any questions, just ping them down in the comment section, and I'm trying to answer them. I've also preempted some of the questions that you may have, and I'm going to try and answer those as well. So let's get started and let's go straight to the presentation, and then I will share some more perspective. So just bear with me for a minute. I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. So, so today we're going to talk about just tips to get off the wait list. And I think if you really ask yourself, why does school puts candidates in the wait list? I mean, it's just pretty obvious, right? Um, Candidates have had a bunch of people applying in round one. They already know the applicant pool and the strength of it. And maybe they envisage that more applicants are going to come through in round two. And they don't really know how strong those candidates will be in round two or round three. And they're pretty much um, giving themselves time to evaluate candidates before making up their minds. So uh, that's typically why people put candidates on a wait list, and honestly, it's not the best place for a candidate to be on. It can be quite stressful and quite telling. And there's certain things that you can do to just get yourself out of this situation or know what to expect during this situation. But one thing I must say before we start is that this has been a year of exception. It has been extremely challenging, whether for students, for schools, and for admission consultants as well. And the reason I say that is because last year so many candidates have deferred, and so many candidates have not accepted admissions and just decide to do the MBA later. This year we have a huge number of uh, applicants as such, and the sheer number of applicants is uh, quite amazing actually. So from an admissions consultant perspective, I should be really happy. But in truth, when you're looking at some of the results and some of the results some of our clients are seeing and some of the situations the clients are in, it's not the best. So we've seen, unfortunately, this year we've seen so many candidates get waitlisted and so many of them get rejected. And you just need to put things in perspective why this is happening. So last year, you had a lot of deferred candidates who deferred the admission to this year. So already a certain number of seats are occupied, and many of you already know that. Schools also know that. But a lot of these guys who have deferred are now taking a shot and applying to something more competitive. And that's really changing the game. So schools don't know what to expect. So you have candidates. In fact, I have a few candidates who've been admitted with a full scholarship at a particular school in round one, and they simply let me go all out in round two. So schools don't know whether someone's going to really accept that offer or not, and they don't want to be in a place where they're making offers and people are rejecting them. So this is really a year of exception where you have more candidates applying from more countries, and always when there's a recession, you find that more people are going back to BSchool. So this year you have so much more representation and so many more internationals as well. It's getting particularly challenging. And at the end of it, everyone's fighting for a limited number of seats. So I can understand what schools are going through as well. Now, I think in terms of demographic, perhaps the worst hit is the Indian male. I think this demographic is really going to struggle this year, and it's not a good place to be in, no matter how competitive you are. And I think one more googly as such, which is adding to this entire mix, is that schools are offering GMAT waivers as well, which makes it even more difficult to evaluate candidates. So what's going to happen? I think schools are going to wait and see who's paying the deposit at the end of round one, who's accepting the offer, and and then they're going to look at round two applications as such. Um, there is a possibility that a lot of candidates will accept offers in round one, will pay a deposit, and they will apply to other schools in round two, or pursue uh, the opportunity to get off the wait list at more competitive schools in round two. And that's going to happen. So I do think that this year is going to be an exceptional year. We're going to have a lot of waitlisted candidates right till the end of round two, early round three, perhaps even the end of round three. So that said, I would say just don't beat yourself up. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too critical. Take this in your stride. And one thing you have to be just be positive and be patient. And with that, I would say that look at being waitlisted as a positive sign. Schools like you, there's something that they really found attractive about your candidacy, and that's the reason why you're on the waitlist. So it's in a much better place to be than being rejected. And that's the way I would look at it. Just look at everything to very positive light. But at the same time, you really want to ask yourself, do you want to remain on the wait list and do you want to go through with this as well? Obviously, for most people, the answer is pretty obvious, right? If you want to be on the wait list or not. Everyone would, unless you already have an offer from another school, in which case you probably would accept that. But if you are waitlisted at a school which is more competitive, you definitely would choose to remain on that waitlist. So the first thing that you will do in most schools, you just need to check a box in the application form and commit to wanting to remain on the waitlist. In some cases, some schools ask you to send them a letter, and in which case you just send a very professional response. Just reinforce a commitment to the program. Say something like, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to stay on the waitlist," before you communicate any more information as such. So be positive about this. You in your initial emails, you don't need to get over emotional. I think there's still time for that. But look at the entire option of staying on the waitlist as something positive and something that you need to work on. So with that said, when schools place you on the waitlist, I think there are a couple of rules that you need to follow. And the main thing is follow the school's instructions. I think some schools are pretty clear that you do not require to send any additional material as such. You don't need to send additional records. You don't need to send additional essays. You just need to be patient and wait. Some schools, on the other hand, they encourage candidates to apply uh, and send across more material. And I think you need to differentiate that. So it's very clearly mentioned in most schools' emails what you should do. Um, in some cases, schools which encourage people to send additional material as well, they still tell candidates who are very strong that listen, there's nothing wrong with your profile. Just be patient and wait it out a little bit. In that case, you don't need to get really aggressive with communicating with the school. So if you're on the wait list, what's the first thing that you need to do? One is just checkbox and say that yes, I want to remain on the wait list. And two, follow the school's instructions. But three, and this is what I would say is the real starting point of the waitlist journey, is get feedback. So the question is, who do you get feedback from? And again, the answer is pretty simple, right? Uh, First, write to the school, ask them for feedback. Some schools will give you very, very specific feedback, saying maybe your GMAT score is not competitive enough, or that's an area in which you need to improve upon, or maybe there are other areas of your application which they need more clarity on. It could be a low GPA, it could be your goals, etc. Some schools will actually give you that feedback. Some of them will organize a feedback session with you as well and do a one-on-one. This year may be a little bit more difficult because I just think of the sheer volume of applications and candidates on the waitlist. Other schools, on the other hand, will just send you generic feedback. And I think there you need to read between the lines and you need to introspect what really went wrong. I think when you're looking at all this feedback, you also have to understand and don't be overcritical about yourself. That this has been an exceptional year. You might have done everything right, and yet you find yourself on the waitlist, or you may find yourself rejected as well. So that's part of the process, right? Uh, So when you're asking for feedback as well, remember one thing: everyone's going to have an opinion, and when you uh, listen to those opinions, I think you need to understand which of those opinions to accept and which ones to just say, okay, sure. Um, Someone else you can get in touch with is the person who interviewed you, especially if it's an alumnus or a secondary student. Ask them. Now, obviously, this is going to put them in a really uncomfortable position. They're going to feel quite awkward about it, but ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. But the way to ask is not by saying, hey, what went wrong in my interview and get all emotional about it and put them on the back foot. They're not going to do that. But if you say something like, hey, I'm really excited to get into XYZ school, and I was wondering if you could share some feedback on where I could improve or any tips on how I can get off the wait list or things I can do to improve my candidacy as such or improve my chances of converting as such. And when you ask people for help, I think the way they look at you is different. Um, Sometimes people actually feel obliged to help, and people, it's just human tendency, they want to help people. So you might find that approach working better, but by and large as well, I still think that sometimes when you write to interviewers, they may feel a little awkward in providing you with direct feedback, but yet it's your duty to just ask for it. If you get it, great. When I say family and friends, I mean perhaps you've shown your application around, especially friends who've been applying to B school, who are with you on this journey. If they've not seen your essays as well, share them. Share your essays with family, share your application with family, and you get some feedback from them as well about where you could improve, things that you may have missed. It could be something in your application form, it could be something which is not explained well, maybe it's the quality of your essays. So you get different opinions. You could share your essays with people from the school that you're applying to as well. They may give you some feedback on uh, the essays, whether they're touching upon the key strengths of the school or not, whether it sounds convincing or not, or whether it's just a copy paste template that you've used. And they may also tell you that these are perhaps areas that you need to work upon. And obviously, you can always reach out to admission consultants themselves. A lot of Many admission consultants have a lot of years of experience as well, and they're great at understanding what's gone wrong and where someone can improve, and actually the possibility of converting, right? So by and large, I would say when you start in this process, start with feedback. Okay. The second thing I would tell you is self-reflect. And the reason I put up these two different images is because when I see people reflecting, I see them looking at themselves in completely different views. Some people are so overcritical about themselves, which is the image on my left. They just viewing themselves in a very, very poor light. And some other people say, no, listen, I've done everything right. Uh, there's nothing wrong with my candidacy and schools have got it wrong and they get really upset and everything else. So I think you have to find the right balance. And when you get on this journey, when you embark on this journey, I think what you want to do is understand what have you done well, where do you feel you need to improve upon. If you if you've done your applications last minute, then you pretty much know you've not put enough effort into the application. If you've done a copy paste of a template, then you already know that. And that's one of the indications. So that's an area in which you need to start with. How much time do you spend on those applications? Um, if you've gone through about more than 5 or 6 or 7 edits, then yes, you really want to get your essays reviewed and your application reviewed. Perhaps your approach has been wrong, or perhaps there's nothing wrong with the application, right? Maybe it's just being a case of there being limited seats and just being overly competitive. So that's still a good sign. You're still on the wait list, and schools like you. So if you've done everything well and there's nothing wrong with your application, yes, there are certain strategies that you still need to follow. You still need to work upon. But I think through that process as well, you will still identify areas of improvement. And those are the areas in which you need to work upon. So let's get into the sort of areas that you could work upon. Um, and the common problems I tend to see, and which most schools will also communicate, is perhaps it's your test scores. Maybe you realize that, listen, my GMAT score, my GRE score is not meeting the class average. With certain demographics, Indians, Chinese, you tend to find that the average GMAT score for these populations is relatively higher than the class average. For example, at many of the top 15 business schools in the US, you would find that the lowest GMAT score for an Indian male is close to 740, rather close to 740. The moment you're at 730, in some cases, you're already going to be struggling, right? So if you've realized that your GMAT score is not so competitive, and you're probably aware about that anyway, then yes, should you improve your GMAT score? Should you retake the GMAT? By all means. Will 10 points make a difference from 720 to 730? Not so much. From 730 to 740, yes, I think for some schools, 740 is a psychological figure, 750 is a psychological figure. So that does help. From 740, do you need to go ahead into 750? I don't think so, but it doesn't hurt. If you're already at 750, do you need to retake the GMAT and improve and go up by 10, 20 points? I think that really doesn't matter. I think you're pretty competitive anyway. The problem is not the test score. And I think you should understand that. It doesn't hurt if you retake it, but there's no need to. So you would understand that the problem is not the test score if you're at 750 and above. The problem lies somewhere else in your application. Um, Another question I tend to get asked is that should I take the GR? And if you're not comfortable with the GR, by all means take the GR. Give yourself enough time to prep. Don't rush in and take a test and then don't cancel and put yourself through unnecessary stress. Give yourself some time. Just make sure that your test scores reach school in time. Now the question is, should they go out by the decision date or a couple of weeks before the decision date, or if you need more time, should go out by the end of the round? Now that's a tricky question as such, but these are areas in which I will touch upon a little later as we get onto what you should do with the GMAT. So other areas in which you find that people have struggled with, it could be your undergraduate grades. I see a lot of candidates who've just been easy in college, taking it easy for the first 3 years. The fourth year, when it comes to placement time, they try to ramp up their GPA, etc. But that legacy still remains, and the overall CGPA or GPA is relatively low. And if that's something that you've not addressed in your application, perhaps it's something that you may want to. So I think you need to ask yourself these sort of questions. Is it a problem with my test scores? Is it a problem with my grades? Is it a problem with my career goals? Can someone understand them? Do my goals even require an MBA? Perhaps the need for why I need an MBA is not explained well. Maybe I'm not articulating myself well enough. Or perhaps I've been too bookish, or I just don't have any extracurriculars, extra professional activities to showcase. And this is especially important for schools which have a strong and active community. They want people who will be engaged in the community. The schools are looking for evidence of it. And if you've not shown evidence of it, then sure, that could be a particular problem area, at least when you're comparing yourself to everyone else. Um, Have you really shown your love for the school in an application? I think that's something that you need to ask yourself if it's conveyed well on there. Have you really articulated why you want to go to that school and made a school feel that that's the only school that you want to go to? If not, then you already understand a possible problem area. And perhaps everything in the application is fine, but perhaps the problem lies with the recommendation. This is a tricky area. Maybe you don't know what your recommenders have written. You will not even have access to them. But that's something for you to preempt as such. If you just given them uh, a clean slate and just left it purely on that on trust, then get on and have a discussion with them. Ask them what sort of ratings they gave you, etc., and see, try and understand if that could be a particular problem area. So obviously, once you've identified these areas of improvements uh, and possible areas where you've gone wrong, then identify areas of improvement, right? And the areas that you need to work upon. So should you retake the test? I get this asked I'm asked this question all the time. And I would say, listen, if a school is saying retake it, or you're significantly lower than the class average, or the class average is particularly higher than yours, they're giving you, just read between the lines, retake the test. It doesn't hurt. A higher test score is really going to help you convert and do more good than damage. Should you take the GRE or GMAT? If you've taken the GMAT 6 times, by all means, please take the GRE, right? The other thing with the GRE is there is not that much of a track record as well. There's far more flexibility in terms of reporting scores. Yes, the average GRE score has increased over the last couple of years. At some schools, it's hitting 330, etc., and which, if you convert, will become a 740. But at some schools, a 320, 326 is perfectly acceptable. 312, perhaps not. Now, this really depends upon the competitiveness of the school. Usually, we tend to talk about only the top 20 or top 30, but you can take the top 100 as well. You know, if you can do something to improve your score or to improve your candidacy and strengthen it, take it. Yeah, just make sure that you're trying to score something higher than the class average or higher or in the range of the demographic that's applying. So that's with test scores, right? The second thing that you need to do is send updates. And this is a tricky part. How many updates? So yes, updates only go out to schools which really ask for updates. You don't send updates to school which is not really asking for them and asking to be patient. You're really going to piss them off. Excuse my language. But how many updates should you send and how frequently? So if it's been round one, you want your first update to go sometime in mid-Feb, which is around now, or perhaps even slightly earlier. Um, Sometimes I get asked the question, but I don't have any updates. And honestly, if you're not going to send an update, you're really hoping for a miracle because everyone else who's on the wait list, they are at it, they are doing a good job, and they're putting in all the effort to convert. So if you're just going to sit around, twiddle your thumbs and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to wait for the school to reply and get back to me, and sure, I have nothing to update, you're not going to convert. Or rather, you're going to find it very, very challenging to convert. So how many updates again? Uh, every month, every 45 days, and I think that should be good. So your first update for round one at least will go out sometime in mid-Feb. The second update would be perhaps about 10 days before the decisions are made, or rather are rolled out, and that's when you want to do it. Um, And if you're saying, listen, I really have nothing to update my schools about, I think we should have a strategy and do something, send something. It could be any of these sort of topics. It could be a professional development. So what goes under professional development? Um, it could be a promotion at work, a new project, new leadership experiences. If you're talking about, it could be a change of location, it could be any of those sort of things. It could be an appraisal rating that you've got. So at the end of it, you still want to show progression and you still want to show that you've tried to proactively improve upon certain areas as well. So supposing you identified that, yes, you are lacking little leadership, then you can say, I've taken the initiative to do this as well, which is helping gain more leadership experience. So share an update on that. Personal accomplishments. If you've done something um, in sport, in the community, or um, you've got a new certification, you won a professional award, you won an award from your company, share those. If you've gained any new leadership experiences, whether it's professional or personal, those are some things that you could write about. Whether you've led a cricket team uh, to a victory, perhaps that is something that you can talk about, not so much about the win itself, but about the leadership experience. You could update the school on additional classes that you've taken and courses that you've taken, especially if you've identified that your quant skills are slightly weak. You can say, hey, I've completed this course and it's quite challenging, and these are the scores that I've got, and especially if you've got a really high grade in that, that will kind of make up or add some value uh, to your application and to your candidacy. Um, if you've done any personal development courses, I think I've had clients who been particularly weak in their communication skills. So through the application stage when they're fine. When they went to the interview, that's when they struggled a little bit. And they said, listen, I got really nervous. I couldn't get all my messages out. Um, I'm not sure if I articulated everything really well. Maybe they did, but they didn't just come across as very confident. Then perhaps you know that, okay, I need to work on my communication skills and update the score that listen. That's something I'm working upon. I've signed up for Toastmasters. I've signed up for this presentation course as well. And those are other areas that you can update the school on. Now, especially when you're talking about professional developments, it's not really easy sharing an update every 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, things may not change, or even every month, a month and a half, for that matter. But you still need to send something, right? So think about what you want to share and where you want to share. If your first update is about professional accomplishments and professional development, the second one could be something more community and more personal oriented, right? With your updates as well, you may want to tell the schools about other things that have happened and transpired during the process. Maybe you got an admit to another school. Apprise the school of that. Maybe you got a scholarship as well. So let's say you got into a school in the top 15 with a significant scholarship, but you're waitlisted at an M7 school. So perhaps you inform them about that, and then you show your commitment towards joining the school. And I think that's the most important thing, right? That you, with your update, you just won't tell the school that that's the only thing that you've been doing. You also really want to show your love for the school. You really want to show a passion for joining the school. So with every update, you kind of want to make some sort of note about that. You want to talk about uh, why you want to come to that school, what really stands out for you. Maybe in another update, you could share how you will contribute to the school and how you've uniquely contributed that too. Um, Share names of people you've communicated with. Show a real passion. But one suggestion, do not only just stick to emails or do not just stick to a portal. Pick up the phone and call them. Call your waitlist manager. Um, if they remember you and they can see the effort, I think that will just earn you brownie points. So don't be shy about it. Say, oh, listen, I have nothing to say. Oh, I couldn't get them on the phone. And it's possible that a lot of schools actually aren't answering phones today. Maybe because of the weather, maybe because of COVID. Um, but you still have to try. Get on, get onto the phone, have a call, schedule a consultation if you want, or just tell them that listen, this is what I've done. Have you received my update? I've shared this as well. Have you received it? Is there anything else I can do? What do you suggest? Perhaps they'll just say, okay, listen, be calm, wait, we'll revert, but they will remember. And I think that's the most important thing that you're going to achieve from a phone call, that they remember you and they see that effort and they see that passion for the school. Okay, what else can you do? You can get additional recommendations. Now, you don't need to feel obliged to send them. And if you've already sent two professional recommendations from a particular organization, you don't need to go and get a third one. You don't need to say, oh, listen, I've only got recommendations from my managers and I need to get someone who's really senior. Perhaps, yes, especially if they're an alumnus of the school, right? But otherwise, don't feel obliged to send a professional recommendation which is not going to shed any new light on your candidacy. Um, get a recommendation from alumni or from students who really see a passion for joining the school, people who know you uh, and who've worked with you, or studied with you, and are alumnus of that school, and can see how you fit into that school, and let them write about how you are a great fit. It doesn't need to be a very long recommendation, but that additional word from an alumnus or from a current student, I think will go a long way. If you had submitted two professional recommendations and you've been really active in the community, perhaps you could consider getting a recommendation from the NGO you've worked with or any of the charity organizations that you've been involved with. They could consider something. If you've been involved in sport or in any other extracurricular activity, you could perhaps get a recommendation from someone heading that organization as such. You may want to get additional professional recommendations if you've worked with multiple companies. and one of those experiences may be dated, but still may be very, very unique. So those are areas in which you can get additional professional recommendations, or some schools have only asked for one professional recommendation, in which case feel free to send another professional recommendation across as well. Obviously, you're not going to send it. You're going to ask your recommender to um, write to the school directly. Okay, so that's pretty much my entire set of tips for getting off the waitlist and strategies to uh, manage the entire waitlist process effectively. But most importantly, I would say, through this entire exercise, be positive, be patient, and persist. Those are the three P's that you need to keep in mind, right? It's not an easy time. Uh, you just have to be positive, you have to persist, and most importantly, you have to be patient. And if you're not going to do anything, especially when school is expecting candidates on the waitlist to do something, you're not really giving yourself a chance. So uh, that's what I would say. Let me end by moving on to answer some of the questions that are actually preempted for you, which is how long does it take to get off the waitlist? And I think that's a really, really tricky question. You could get off the waitlist at the end of round two or during round two itself when they're evaluating other candidates and they see the quality of applications coming through. It may be after round two, just when or just little after schools have received their deposits from candidates and then they get more visibility on who's coming to school and who's not. And sometimes it go all the way up to June, July. When round two is over, round three is over, schools are still making their minds. And that's a really, really telling time. And last year it happened to a number of my candidates, even at schools at Stanford, etc. A lot of people didn't move off the waitlist. A lot of the movement happened in late May. Some of it happened in early June. Candidates are still waitlisted to the end of June. It's not a great situation to be in, but that's really how long it takes. And that's something that you need to be prepared for while you're working on this uh, or going through this process. Another question. If you have to wait all the way up to June or July, will there be enough time for you to get a visa? And short answer is yes. Um, when you're applying for a visa, the school doesn't take too long to prepare it. It's not and to process it. I think if your documentation is in order, especially your financial documentation, you just you've sent all your original transcripts and mark sheets, etc., to the school, then it's pretty easy for them to process, right? Especially when there's not too much volume of I-20 to process as well. If you're talking about a challenge from getting a visa appointment, I think most of the US consulate has, and most of the other consulates also have emergency um, services as such. And they know that this is a business. They know that the country earns a lot of revenue through education. They will make provisions for accepting student visas pretty early. So I don't think getting a visa will be a challenge. And I think most schools are aware of this as well, and they'll make sure that you get enough time to get a visa. I've had a situation where a candidate, I think it's not about a waitlist, but he got his final decision about 3 weeks before the program started. And there was more than enough time for him to wind up the physical compliance and get his visa. So short answer, yes, there'll be enough time to get a visa. Should you apply to other schools in round three? Now, this is another interesting question. And this year, being as challenging as it has been, I would be inclined to say no. Don't. Wait it out. Strengthen your candidacy. Do whatever you can to get off the waitlist. Um, Write to schools, show your passion, uh, get alumni to recommend you, get an additional recommendation, improve your GMAT, make an all-out effort, but don't apply to schools in round three. Um, If you have to just go back, get on ClearMate, get on GMAT Club, look at the statistics, look at the number of people with strong profiles, or profiles more competitive than you who've been rejected. If there have been a lot of those, then you definitely do not want to apply in round three. If your profile stands out amongst the average candidate that you've seen getting rejected or waitlisted out there, then perhaps that you could consider. Um, but by and large, for me, applying in round three is a no-no. Now, some schools last year offered GMAT waivers. This year, a lot of schools also are offering GMAT waivers. Should you apply without a GMAT score? And again, if it's really competitive schools and you're applying as part of a really competitive applicant pool, then I would say no, uh, don't. Okay. Should you ask for deferral? Okay. Now, this is an interesting question again, and I would say um, you should, but not too early in the process. Wait. Um, Especially if you've been waitlisted after an interview, wait, wait for the decisions to come through after round two, towards the end of round three. If you still find yourself in the waitlist, if you still find yourself around June, write to the school and give them that option. Say, this is the only school I want to come to. I'm willing to, accept a seat next year as well and start next year. I don't really want to go through the entire process. And you never know. They may really accept. You can tell them that you'd rather be deferred than rejected. It's entirely up to the school whether they are going to defer candidates to the following year, but at least you've done your bit. Now, if you've been waitlisted without an interview, you cannot. That already means there's something wrong with your profile or that there's scope for improvement in your profile. And that's something that the school's looking for. Let's say after you send a few updates, you do an interview, you still find yourself in the waitlist. You follow up with the strategies that we've discussed, you send some additional recommendations, you send more updates, you show your love for the school, and you still find yourself uh, waitlisted. Then you may ask for a deferral, but don't do it too early. Don't do it at the end of round two. I still think there's enough time for that, and I still think for the waitlist to move as such, you will need to be a little patient. So don't do this too early. And the last message I would actually say is, if you find that the waitlist is taking too long, start preparing for next year or the year after that. But I would say, I imagine next year to be a lot less competitive than this year. Um, Unless there's a bigger recession and there's so many more people who become jobless and you find a lot more people applying to school. But I think the likelihood of that happening twice is slightly less. I should be saying is nothing, but yeah, I mean, the way stock markets are going, you never know what's going to happen there. But I would say I imagine next year to be a little less competitive. I think hopefully a lot less competitive than this year. Let's say have a strategy for next year. Sometimes there could be nothing wrong with your profile, and you've done everything in your power to get off the to get off the waitlist. You've retaken the GMAT. You've sent constant updates. You've sent additional recommendations. You've got an alumnus recommending you as well, and yet nothing's happened. Um, Pat yourself on the back, lift yourself up, give yourself a short break and get ready to apply next year. It'll be easier. I've had so many brilliant candidates working with me. I don't have an answer for them. Why they didn't get in, why they're on the waitlist. Um, Guys with 760 GMAT scores, international experience, studied some of the best schools, uh, great at interviewing as well, just find themselves waitlisted. And honestly, that's for no fault of theirs. So if you recognize that, don't compromise on the ground. If you realize that you're competitive, hold out, wait for another year, especially if you've done everything that you could in your power to get off the waitlist. So with that, if you have any questions or if you feel that um, you want to schedule a consultation, feel feel, feel free to reach out to me by just going on my website, vikramshahconsulting.com, go on the menu, free consultation, fill up the form, write to me, drop me an email if you want. Or if you're doing this presentation right now and you have a few questions, please feel to ask me. I'm going to take questions for about 5 minutes or maybe a little longer. Uh, and then, yeah, and then we're going to wind up this session. So let me just take a few questions and I'll take them. Oh, okay, so I have a question. Does INSEAD encourage additional details? If you're doing school by school, um, I think it's difficult for me to remember everything, but yes, I think most schools do, unless they very specifically say, listen, don't send us any additional information. I have another question which says, I was waitlist by with a 670 by Conan during early decision. So is this for the 1 year program or the 2 year program? If it's for the 2 year, if you've got an GRE score of 329, I think that's competitive and that should definitely help you. If you've updated them about a job, a maths course that you've done. Yes, all of this will help you with your candidacy. I think you just need to be a little patient and give them time to process round two. And again, like I said, write to them, talk to them about why you feel Cornell Johnson is the best school for you, and just be a little patient. And in case you're still on the wait list, then I think that yes, maybe send a couple of more updates as well. Yes. Is it safe to say that candidates on the waitlist are not considered for a scholarship? I would say absolutely. I think the most competitive clients or candidates rather uh, would attract the school's attention very, very early on. They would be offered a seat very early on, and a school will do everything in their power to tempt them to come and accept, and they may offer them some sort of funding early on as well. Especially this goes with merit scholarships. When it comes to need-based scholarships, those are completely different. Some schools um, offer need-based scholarships to all candidates, whether they're on the waitlist or not. So if you're talking about need-based scholarships, especially at schools like a Harvard or Stanford, yes, sure, you will qualify for those. So I'm just going to look for the last couple of questions, and if there is anything, happy to answer. Otherwise, if you must, just drop me an email uh, or reach out to me, do a consultation if you want, or in general, just refer to this presentation. Uh, be patient, be positive, wait it out, and persist. Uh, and hopefully, I pray that all of you guys who are on the wait list convert and get off the wait list. How long should one wait? I think I've already answered this question. 45 days, a month to 45 days between each update. Don't send just one update in round one update in round three, etc. I think wait. So if you've been waiting some early action, one update in round uh, one update towards the end of the year, which has already gone by. If you've not done that yet, uh, by mid-Feb, you should send an update. You should send the next update by about 10th of March, while your results are coming out around 18th, 20th, 22nd of April. If you're still on the wait list, send another update by 15th April. Just keep sending updates. Don't rejig the same material. Just keep that in mind. Everything should share something new and should add some more flavor to your candidacy as such. I'm going to take one more question if there is one. Otherwise, uh, we will end for tonight. It's been great chatting with you guys, and thank you so much for patiently listening to me. And like I said, I wish all the best for all of you on the waitlist, and I really hope that you do convert. It's been a really, really trying year for everyone, and uh, better days are ahead. So yes, be positive, be patient and persist, and hopefully you will convert. All the best, guys. Thank you so much.